The first laugh echoed across the crowded estate auction just seconds before the old rusty chest was dragged into the sunlight, but the final silence that followed hours later would haunt everyone who had mocked the young woman forever. The chest was ugly beyond words, buried beneath decades of rust, wrapped in thick iron bands, and so badly welded shut that even the auction staff joked it would be easier to melt it than open it. People laughed louder when the bidding stalled at $20. They laughed harder when a quiet young woman raised her hand and offered $100 for what everyone believed was nothing more than worthless scrap metal. None of them realized they were watching a broken heart unknowingly purchase the missing piece of another broken family's history. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness can change lives, that forgiveness is stronger than revenge, and that hope deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who believes in compassion, and subscribe to our channel so our community can continue sharing stories that remind us how goodness still exists in the world. Maren Caldwell had learned long before that people usually laughed before they understood. At 27 years old, she carried herself with quiet determination that came only from surviving years of disappointment without allowing bitterness to settle inside her heart. Her clothes were simple, carefully repaired rather than replaced. Her aging pickup truck had over 200,000 miles on it. She rented a tiny apartment above an old bakery and spent her weekdays restoring broken furniture that wealthier people threw away without a second thought. Every scratch she sanded away and every cracked chair she repaired reminded her that almost anything could become beautiful again if someone cared enough not to give up on it. Her father had believed exactly the same thing. Before illness stole him away 5 years earlier, Theodore Caldwell had been one of the town's finest restoration craftsmen. He never collected expensive antiques because they were valuable. Instead, he rescued forgotten objects because he believed every item carried someone's memories. Growing up beside him, Maren had watched old clocks begin ticking again, weathered rocking chairs welcome new generations, and faded family tables become places where laughter returned after years of silence. The greatest lesson he ever taught her had nothing to do with wood or metal. He had smiled one warm afternoon and told her that people were exactly like antiques. The world judged appearances while love discovered hidden worth. Those words had become the foundation of her entire life. After losing both her father and her small inheritance to overwhelming medical expenses, Maren survived by restoring whatever others discarded. Some weeks she barely earned enough to cover rent. Other weeks she found forgotten treasures that paid several months of bills. Yet she never chased fortune. She chased purpose. The estate auction that morning belonged to the late Walter Ashcombe, an elderly collector whose enormous countryside home had remained untouched after his passing. Hundreds of buyers arrived hoping to discover paintings, jewelry, vintage automobiles, or valuable collectibles. Professional dealers filled the front rows while curious neighbors wandered behind them. Maren came simply because estate sales often contained damaged furniture nobody else wanted. She found several broken cabinets worth repairing, but they attracted too much attention from antique dealers willing to pay more than she could afford. Disappointed but unsurprised, she wandered toward the back storage barn where unwanted items had been piled carelessly. That was where she first saw the chest. Its surface was almost entirely hidden beneath rust. Heavy weld marks stretched across every edge, sealing the lid permanently shut. Someone had intentionally made certain nobody could open it. A faded brass plate had once carried a name, but corrosion erased nearly every letter except two barely visible initials. W. Walter Ashcombe. The auction workers joked that it was probably filled with old bricks. Another guessed someone had welded it shut because it smelled terrible decades earlier. Laughter spread quickly. Maren noticed something nobody else did. The chest had been handcrafted by someone extraordinarily skilled. Even beneath corrosion she recognized elegant dovetail joints, carefully forged hinges, and decorative ironwork unlike factory production. Whoever created it had poured remarkable care into something they clearly intended to last generations. Someone had loved this chest, that mattered to her. When bidding opened, nobody offered more than $20. She raised her paddle. $100. The crowd burst into laughter. One dealer loudly suggested she had paid 5 times too much for a pile of rust. Another joked that she should have bought a wheelbarrow because she'd need somewhere to dump it. Maren simply smiled politely, signed her receipt, and arranged for the chest to be loaded into her truck. As she drove away beneath the bright afternoon sun, she wasn't thinking about hidden treasure, she was thinking about her father. He would have stopped for that chest too. Back at her small workshop behind the bakery, she carefully examined every inch. The welds looked decades old rather than recent. Whoever sealed it had done so professionally. There was no visible keyhole because a steel plate had been welded directly over it. Instead of attacking it with heavy equipment, she spent hours cleaning away rust layer by layer. Tiny details slowly emerged. Near one corner she discovered delicate floral engravings almost invisible beneath corrosion. Near another edge she uncovered a nearly hidden inscription. "Protect what matters." Those 3 words sent an unexpected chill through her. This chest had never been sealed to hide garbage. It had been sealed to preserve something. Using her father's old restoration notebook, Marin carefully removed only the external weld beads without damaging the original iron beneath. The work demanded extraordinary patience. Sparks flew into the daylight while sweat covered her face. Several times she considered giving up because one careless movement could destroy whatever waited inside. Nearly 5 hours later, the final welded seam separated, the lid still refused to move. Years of rust had fused everything together. She gently tapped around the edges with a wooden mallet. A soft crack echoed, the lid slowly lifted. Inside rested not gold, not jewels, not cash. Only neatly wrapped bundles of paper surrounded by faded velvet cloth. For one heartbreaking second disappointment crossed her face. Then she opened the first bundle. It contained hundreds of handwritten letters. The next bundle held dozens of family photographs, another contained birth certificates, military records, journals, children's drawings, marriage licenses, newspaper clippings, and carefully labeled albums stretching back nearly 90 years. An entire family's history, perfectly preserved. Tears filled Marin's eyes before she even understood why. Someone had welded the chest shut to protect memories. Instead of money. As she gently turned each page, one name appeared repeatedly: Evelyn Ashcombe. Walter's younger sister. According to one journal, she had disappeared from public records during childhood after a terrible misunderstanding split the family apart. A bitter inheritance dispute between relatives had scattered siblings across different countries. Walter had spent decades searching for her descendants without success. His final journal described collecting every remaining photograph and letter before sealing them away, hoping someone one day might reconnect the family. The final page carried his trembling handwriting. "If these memories survive longer than I do, please return them to anyone who still carries our family name. They deserve to know they were always loved." Marin sat silently while sunlight streamed through the workshop windows. She knew exactly what she had to do. The search consumed several weeks, using public archives, genealogy websites, old newspapers, and local historical societies. She slowly traced Evelyn's descendants to a small coastal town several hundred miles away. Only one direct family member remained: a widowed elementary school teacher named Beatrice Rowan. When Marin finally arrived carrying the restored chest in her truck, she expected skepticism. Instead, she found exhaustion. Beatrice had spent years believing her mother's family history ended in mystery. Every older relative had died before explaining why photographs disappeared or why certain names were never spoken again. When Marin carefully opened the restored chest beneath the afternoon sun and placed the first photograph into Beatrice's trembling hands, decades of unanswered questions dissolved into quiet tears. There was her grandmother as a smiling little girl. There were great-grandparents whose faces nobody alive had ever seen. There were birthday celebrations, weddings, handwritten recipes, childhood report cards, pressed flowers, family stories, and thousands of tiny pieces of a life thought permanently lost. Most heartbreaking of all were Walter's letters written every birthday to the sister he never stopped loving. He never mailed them because he never found her. He simply kept writing, year after year, decade after decade. Beatrice wept without restraint. Her children gathered around reading stories about ancestors they had never known existed. One little granddaughter hugged the old chest as though it were alive. Marin quietly stepped outside, believing the moment belonged entirely to them. A few minutes later Beatrice followed. She embraced Marin with overwhelming gratitude. No amount of money could repay what had been returned. but she insisted on sharing something else. Walter's attorney had established a reward in his estate for anyone who successfully reunited the family's historical collection with living descendants. Nobody had expected anyone to accomplish it. The reward remained unclaimed. It totaled nearly $300,000. Maren stood speechless. She had purchased the chest for $100 because she respected forgotten craftsmanship. Instead, she had restored an entire family's identity. News spread rapidly through local newspapers and television stations. Soon everyone from the auction remembered the laughing. Many admitted feeling ashamed. Some even visited Maren's workshop simply to apologize. The antique dealer who had mocked her most loudly confessed he had spent decades chasing expensive objects while forgetting that the greatest treasures often carried emotional rather than financial value. Maren accepted every apology without bitterness. Because her father had been right, people deserved restoration too. Rather than spending the reward on luxury, Maren expanded her tiny workshop into a community restoration center where struggling teenagers, unemployed veterans, lonely retirees, and people rebuilding difficult lives learned practical skills while restoring furniture, heirlooms, and historical objects together. Every restored item carried a small brass plaque engraved with the same words discovered inside the rusty chest: "Protect what matters." Soon families donated forgotten heirlooms instead of throwing them away. Elderly residents shared stories that younger generations recorded forever. Children learned that history wasn't trapped inside museums but lived inside ordinary homes and ordinary hearts. Years later, visitors entering the workshop often paused before a carefully restored rusty chest displayed near the entrance. It remained empty, intentionally. Beside it stood another simple plaque: "The greatest treasures are rarely what we expect. Sometimes they are the memories that remind us who we are. Sometimes they are the people willing to preserve them." Maren smiled every time she walked past it because she knew the chest had never truly belonged to her. It had simply trusted her long enough to find its way home, and perhaps that was the greatest miracle of all. Not that $100 purchase became valuable, but that compassion transformed laughter into humility, strangers into family, and forgotten history into living hope. The crowd had seen only rust, but one patient heart had seen possibility. In choosing kindness over judgment, she discovered that the richest inheritance anyone can receive is not measured in gold or jewels, but in love that refuses to disappear even after generations have passed. Before this story ends, please leave a meaningful comment sharing one family memory, lesson, or act of kindness that you hope will never be forgotten, because your words may inspire someone else to treasure what truly matters. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. May we all remember that the world often laughs at what it cannot yet understand, but kindness has a remarkable way of revealing priceless treasures hidden beneath the rust of ordinary life.